Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. Today we're finishing our year-long happiness series with a super exciting guest. Gretchen Rubin, the author of Happier at Home, is here to talk about happiness and now. After almost 10 years, how have her happiness goals held up? What did she learn that continues to impact her today? Join us as we discuss all this and more. Let's get started. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Marie.
Hi, Mindy.
Hey, Marie.
Listeners, today we've come to the end of our happiness series that we started last October, and we have quite the show for you. As a reminder, we've been going through a chapter a month of the book Happier at Home, written by best-selling author Gretchen Rubin, designed to make our homes places of greater simplicity, comfort, and love. The book tackles one topic related to happiness each month from September through May. Last month, in episode 75, we talked about increasing happiness and the world around us, and this month we're talking about happiness and now. And listeners, do we have a treat for you? Today, we are joined by Gretchen Rubin, the author of Happier at Home. Gretchen, welcome to Midlife Matters.
Well, I'm so happy to be talking to you. Thanks so much for having me join you.
Yes, we are absolutely thrilled. And I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't tell our listeners a little more about you before we get started. So listeners, as I mentioned before, Gretchen is the author of many books, New York Times bestsellers, Outer Order, Inner Calm, The Four Tendencies, Better Than Before, and The Happiness Project. She also has a top-ranking, award-winning podcast, Happier with Gretchen Rubin, where she discusses happiness and good habits with her sister, Elizabeth Kraft. You may have also seen her on CBS This Morning, where every Monday she shares her solutions and tips for living a happier, healthier, and more productive life. Gretchen, you have quite the resume, and we're just thrilled to be talking to you. And we've been living by your book, Happier at Home, since September, so quite a long time. But before we get into what we've learned, can you think back and tell listeners what prompted you to write this book in particular? What did it mean to you at the time, and what did you hope to gain in the process?
Well, I had written the book, The Happiness Project, which was a year that I took to sort of, do a deep dive into all the things that I thought might make me happier. So I did all this research into the contemporary science, ancient wisdom, lessons from popular culture, talking to people around me to try to figure out, is there a way to make myself happier? Can you make yourself happier? What might you do to try to make yourself happier? And then I used myself as sort of a human guinea pig to try out everything. And what I found was that it was absolutely possible to make the experience of my life happier. And I had so much fun doing that. And yet there were so many things where I wanted to go deeper or I wanted to think harder. And so in the Happiness Project, I was sort of trying to come up with like an overall framework for thinking about happiness, because happiness is so abstract and transcendent. It took me a while to figure out how to just even think about happiness. And then as that book came out and I was talking to people and thinking about it more and more, I realized, I was always looking for universals. I'm always trying to figure out what's true for everyone. And it turns out, there is no magic one-size-fits-all solution. And you really have to think very hard about distinctions among people and how I might be different from you or you might be different from each other. But I started thinking, well, it's not 100% universal, but it's pretty universal that most people have an idea of home. Mm-hmm. And in Laura Ingalls Wilder, there's a part where Carrie is very unhappy because something's happened with the terrible Miss Wilder teacher. And Laura, the narrator, observes, it's not possible to be happy if you're not happy at home. Mm. And I thought, that's really true. How can you be happy if you're not happy at home? And so I thought, well, I want to do another happiness project, but this time I want to go very deeply into the aspects of my life that are centered on home, because really those are at the core of my happiness. The Happiness Project was broad, and so in Happier at Home, I wanted to go deeper.
Yes. And I love that about your project. And I even love the fact that I think your Happiness Project starts in January and goes through December, but Happier at Home really fits a mom's life with the school year. Every September, we really do feel like we start over, and it's a great time to reevaluate.
I think people that don't have children feel the same way, because if you've gone through school yourself, so unless
True.
you just never had part of that, and then everything in kind of in culture, it's like the fresh new pencils, the new notebooks, this back to school, it's really starting again. So I'm glad to hear that resonated with you, because I really do feel like for most people, September is the other January.
For sure. All right. Well, this book has been such a blessing in my own life this year, and I know that Julie and Mindy feel the same way.
Oh, yes, Gretchen, I love a good project, and your book is a great project for me. I think we all want to be happier, but we don't take an active enough role in that. I don't know. I tend to kind of just be a passive reactor to life. And I just loved being deliberate each month in deciding what I wanted to do and then doing it. I loved in your note to the reader at the beginning of the book, you said you were able to change your life without changing your life. And that was just an encouragement to me, because I guess that's just another way of saying you found a way to boost your happiness within your own circumstances. Like, I think so many people think they have to have more of something that maybe they can't have or won't ever have to be happier. But you found that wasn't true.
Some versions of that are called the arrival fallacy. So that's like, I'll be happier once I get a new house. I'll be happier once I make partner. I'll be happier once I have a baby. I'll be happier when I lose 20 pounds. I'll be happier when I go on a great vacation. And what they find is that usually those kinds of big events or big kind of milestones don't bring us as much happiness as we anticipate. And then there's also the feeling of like, well, what I really need is to do a 3-week silent meditation retreat, or, like feeling like you need some huge change. And I think definitely there are some people who want to make a huge change, who do make a huge change, and it's a wonderful thing for them. And I love reading and hearing about people who've done these, kind of radical transformations. But I don't know that everybody wants that, or everybody could do that even if they wanted to, because it's very demanding to do that, and a lot of us have responsibilities where that's just not really in our foreseeable future. Sometimes it's easy to slip into this idea of thinking, well, if I can't make a big change, then it's not possible to make any change. And what I've really found, and I think is very common for people to find, is that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in just everyday life. You don't have to spend a lot of time, energy, or money to do things that will significantly boost your happiness. And that's what really interests me. It's like, what's the stuff that I'm not doing that I could do just as easily now? And it turns out there's a lot. You think, if it makes me happier, why am I not already doing it? And I think exactly to your point, a lot of times it's just, we're so busy, we don't think of it. It doesn't occur to us. We simply don't think about it, or maybe it takes a little bit of planning and we just sort of never get around to it. But it's not really that hard once we decide that, okay, this is something I really want to make up my mind to work on. A lot of times it's not as hard as we might imagine.
Yeah. Well, and it is an abstract idea, happiness. So I appreciate that you made it tangible.
Well, when I was writing the Happiness Project, this was a huge problem for me because I'm very concrete and kind of systematic. And I'm like, I didn't even know how to think about happiness. I was like, there's all these different parts. Everything seemed tangled up in everything else. And then like people do these substitutions where they're like, it's bliss, it's joy, it's satisfaction, it's well-being, it's contentment. And I was like, what does this even mean? The way I think about happiness is it's thinking about feeling good. So you want more of the things that make you feel good, like enthusiasm and love and interest and engagement. Feeling bad. So you want to have less of the things that make you feel bad, like guilt, boredom, anger, resentment. Then you want to think about feeling right. And this is sometimes we do things that don't necessarily make us feel good, but because they're involved in living up to our values. So you might go visit a relative in the hospital, even though you hate hospitals and you really don't even really much like your relative, but you think this is how a family member behaves. This is the right thing to do, even though like I'm not looking forward to it. I'm not enjoying it in the moment. I'm not even reflecting on it with pleasure. It's just me doing what I think is right. And then there's the atmosphere of growth, which is we're all happier when we feel like we're growing in some way. Like the project that you're all talking about, I bet everybody who participated felt a feeling of growth. Like I'm learning, I'm making something better, I'm making other people's lives better, I'm fixing something that's not working. So if you think about feeling good, feeling bad, feeling right in an atmosphere of growth, that kind of covers everything I think contributes to a happy life. Because I agree, it's hard to wrap your mind around it. It's just, what is it?
Well, I feel like, Gretchen, you ask anybody on the street, do you want to be happy? Well, yes, of course. Like anybody, 100% of the time, they're going to say, yes, I want to be happier. But at the same time, are you willing to do something about it? Are you willing to maybe go through pain to get happier? I've actually moved a lot in my life. I feel like overcoming and constantly changing through the moves, constantly looking at my own behaviors and asking myself, well, do I want to be the same person when I move again? What are the things that I didn't like about myself at the last place I lived? And what are the things that I want to change? My co-hosts will agree and laugh along with me, but I do not typically choose to read a book and intentionally try to grow and change because I've been through so much change personally. Going through this book, though, forced me to kind of sit down. And I loved that Marie was like, okay, we're breaking it in one chapter a month. And it was just so doable for me. I'm like, okay, that sounds great and easy. And it was fun. By finding those, what you called low-hanging fruit in my life, it made me think in a way that I wouldn't have thought before. I wouldn't have sat myself down and been intentional in that way before.
You put your finger on a big thing, which is just thinking about like having the intention, because it's sort of like once you say to yourself, I really need to find a way to connect more with my friends. I feel like I'm drifting away from friends and I've lost something that's really important to me. Once you sort of articulate that in your mind, then you can start to sort of think like, well, maybe I'll start a book group, or somebody asked me to join a book group. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll start a group chat once a month with, there's a million things you can do, but you have to have the idea in your head. It has to occur to you to do something about it. And so I think you're exactly right. It's that crucial first step, which is not a hard step, but you can't skip it. What I find is that we can all learn from each other. I'm so lucky because people are constantly telling me the things that they're doing. And I just get so many great ideas. And I think a lot of times you hear about what somebody's doing and you're like, I could do that too. That sounds great. And like immediately, it's not even effortful. It's just, you didn't know of it. Somebody just told me the greatest hack. Okay. So for sibling harmony, we all know the one about you all cut the cake and you pick the piece, right? Because now I got to be fair. But this was an Easter Bunny problem. And my daughters are 6 years apart. So I'm very familiar with the Easter Bunny problem, getting the eggs. Well, this Easter Bunny was very clever. One little boy got blue and green eggs and the other little boy got yellow and orange eggs. So when they were hunting, they knew only to get their own eggs. I'm like, problem solved.
That is great.
And it's just like, it's a little thing. Is it going to significantly boost my happiness? Not a huge amount, but it's a clever solution to sort of a nagging problem. Right. And it's sort of delightful in its elegance of its solution. And I think that there's just so many things that we can learn from each other about everything from dealing with the laundry to imitating a spiritual master. And then when you have an idea, you're so excited to share it. You're like, everybody should do this. And there's so much joy in like being the one who's like come up with a solution to some kind of common issue.
Yes. I can see why you love not only sharing those ideas because you get to see other people's reactions, but also hearing so many.
Yes. Oh my gosh. People are so ingenious. It's great. I love hearing that.
Yes. Well, before we talk about this past month's topic of now, which is the last chapter of the book, we each wanted to tell you the biggest takeaways that we've gotten from your book.
Oh,
just
good.
so that you can hear what we've learned. So, Mindy, do you want to go first?
I would be happy to. When I looked back over the book, I'd actually kept index cards in each chapter, just the things that I had jotted down. And so there were two major takeaways that have really impacted and changed my life. The one, personally, was I wanted to practice self-control. I loved your ideas on self-control because the way you described it, completely, it was like a light bulb went off in my mind and it just changed the way I thought about it. And by changing the way that I thought about it, changed my attitude towards it. You mentioned that self-control gets used up. You only have so much in a day. And I learned that it is easier for me to have none of something than some of something. So I am an abstainer, not a moderator.
Me too.
And I was like, oh my gosh. And that was the light bulb because I am a wannabe moderator, but I am not.
We all want to be moderators.
I am not. And it just, Gretchen, it gave me freedom to be Mindy, to be myself. And just instead of trying to go against the flow, I was able to just embrace that. I was able to just tweak a little bit. And I've actually started intermittent fasting because it gave me freedom so that I can eat what I want within the window of this and this time. And I get to choose those times. But basically, I start at this time and I end at this time. And I don't have to use up my self-control because I'm just done eating.
Right.
food. I've given my testimony before earlier in our podcast. I've had a constant just kind of battle with it. The opportunity to maintain health, weight, and just the freedom in my mind. I don't want to think about it.
It's so boring. Oh my gosh. It sounds like you and I are exactly the same. And I think it's a surprise because I think moderation just sounds so much more sensible and easier. And I'm just I'm just here to say, and you say the same thing. For some people, it's just harder. It's easier to have none than to have a little bit. And people, I'm sure you get this too. You should have a brownie. I'm like, why should I have a brownie? Because then it's just going to mess with my head. Not eating a brownie makes me so much happier than eating a brownie ever could. Why would I?
You helped me not feel so mental.
Good. I know, right? Because everybody says that we're like, what? Why are you so rigid? And I'm like,
Actually, no, I'm giving myself freedom by giving myself a rule. I loved it. It was just a simple change of my mindset. All right. So the next thing is just super sweet, but I love how you talk about entering into the interest of others. By reading this and being intentional, it's really changed my entire home. I have 4 children. The youngest is 12, and then I've got 2 in college. But basically, it helped me delve into the fleeting childhood of my last born child. He has many interests, but there were 2 particular things that he decided he wanted to do. One was he decided he wanted to learn a backflip one day. And then the other was he wanted to learn how to play the piano. And so that was one of my goals, was to invest my time and money into these things. I have sacrificed sleep, time, money, the ability to hear my Hallmark movie, back aches from sitting on uncomfortable bleachers at the gymnastics facility. But by going through those things, we have been given great conversations, laughter, dance parties in the car, high fives, the joy at hearing him play music and be moved by it, gaining prizes of just commitment, determination, not giving up when it's hard or even when it's painful. So he's grown, but so have I. It's been catchy. It's encouraged the entire house to join in and grow in new ways without so much fear. Even my husband has just started to learn how to play the piano.
Wow. Wow. It's catching. That's terrific. Oh, that's so lovely.
Those were my big takeaways.
I love those.
I love have just changed me and changed my home.
Yeah, entering into the interests of others, it's like sometimes you're like, oh, I'm not interested. But usually you can get interested, like if you can't get out of it, get into it, and once you get into it, you're like, oh, I kind of get it, I now love Bob's Burgers. I was like I'm going to actually sit down and watch an episode. And then I'm like, this is actually really good.
Yeah. Well, and if it's something for your kids, we tend to just enjoy their pleasure in it.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, overall, this book was an exercise in knowing myself better. Like Mindy said earlier, that's not something I typically do. So that was kind of a new thing. And I think, in order to grow, you kind of have to know where you are. So that was kind of an overall principle for me. And another thing that I really loved, and I knew this, but it was just good to be reminded each month that as a mom, it's really tempting to try to change the people around you.
Yes. I was just talking to my husband this morning.
But reminding myself that I can't, and that I can only change myself, and that when I change, things often improve around me. So it was just good to keep that in mind each month with each new topic that we dealt with. My favorite chapter was the possessions chapter, just because today you hear so much about possessions, how they don't or shouldn't matter to happiness. And I just appreciated your acknowledgement that to some of us, they do. They can enhance our experiences. They can contribute to our happiness as long as that we're not mastered by them. I really love my home, and most of the most important possessions are those things that don't necessarily cost a lot, but they evoke memories of experiences and memories of people. So it really resonated with me that how much you love photographs. So I have several gallery walls, photo boxes, photo books. I love children's literature, so I have a whole bookcase designed with that I'm, working on collecting these books and finding them. And I enjoyed creating new shrines. I realized that I already had a lot, but I enjoyed doing that. And I think when I read that, you said those who have ties to people tend to represent them in concrete objects, that we don't have to be like if you value possessions, it doesn't mean you don't value people. And I think I must have screamed out loud, yes, because I wrote that in my book in big letters. And so I just thank you for that. I kind of feel like it gave me permission not to feel guilty about my stuff.
Well, that's good. I actually went on to write a book called Outer Order, Inner Calm, which is just a little book that's all about possessions, because I was struck in writing The Happiness Project and Happier at Home, like the degree to which for most people, outer order does contribute to inner calm. But outer order doesn't mean minimalism. It doesn't mean like get rid of everything and just have like one little vase with one little rosebud, which I think for some people, they think that's what it means. Mm-hmm. Because what I realized, just like you, a lot of people love abundance and profusion and collections and walls full of things. And that none of that stuff is clutter. It's all exactly where it's supposed to be, and it's all loved and has value. So clutter is just like stuff that's in your way. But if you have a lot of things that you love, then that's not clutter. And I think you're right. It's a way that we project our identity into our environment, and that's a very important thing. I think some people don't really value it very much. And so they think everybody would be happier if they lived the way they did. That's the thing about self-knowledge. It's like one of the things you have to acknowledge is like yourself is not like everybody else's selves. And just the fact that, my daughter is an abundance lover, and I walk in there and I'm like, I couldn't live like this. There's just stuff everywhere. But, I'm a simplicity lover, but that's the way she wants it. And it's all organized. It's exactly the way she likes it. Mm-hmm. So, just different preferences. So I'm glad to hear that resonated. Yeah. It's great.
And how you said not to, like when you say be Gretchen, to not wish that you were a different way. Because I think it's easy to maybe look at the trends now and think, oh, I wish I were a minimalist or whatever. And it's like, no, I would not be happy that way. So just being happy with who I am and, going with it.
Well, something that made me very sad, actually, is I was doing an interview with a journalist. This is when my book, Better Than Before, had just come out. So it's a book about how do we make and break habits. So it's all about the 21 strategies we can make or break habits. So she is somebody who I know has like struggled with healthy habits for a long time. And we were talking about how to have the habit of exercise. And I was saying, you could do this and this and this and this and this. And she said to me, but I don't want to do those things. I want to be the kind of person who just loves to get up and go for a 5-mile run. And I'm like, but that's an impossible wish, because it's possible that you could go running, but you're wanting to change your inner nature. And it's like, why sit around wishing that you were a completely different kind of person and failing instead of saying like, well, I'm just at my heart, I'm a couch potato, but I can get up there and exercise as well as anybody else, and I'll get all these gains from it, and I'll be glad that I did it. But am I the kind of person who like is skipping down the street because today's the day to train for the ultra marathon? No, I'm not. And part of it is admitting who we aren't and just working with what we have, instead of just wishing, like you say, wishing I were a moderator. I wish I were a moderator. Mm-hmm. Guess what? I didn't get that. Or like my husband, I wish my husband were XYZ. That's not the guy I married,
Right.
And I don't feel like guilt and shame, like if you're constantly being faced with your own shameful tendencies, that doesn't help you at all. Like you're kind of in a downward spiral, and it takes me reaching goals or even very small goals and like celebrating those, like pointing them out loud, like, hey, you did a great job doing that. Like that helps lead to more successes. Success leads to success. But anytime you're constantly like down, talking bad to yourself about what you're not doing, what you could be doing better, you're never going to get anywhere good doing that type of talk.
Well, and exactly the research actually confirms that, and that people sometimes think that if they really castigate themselves when they screw up or break a habit, that will kind of whip them into a frenzy to like stay on course better. But in fact, just like you say, the research shows that people actually do better over the long run if they show compassion to themselves and they say things like, well, that wasn't my best day, or I learned that lesson, or I'm not going to stand next to the buffet table next time, and just sort of say like, well, what can I learn from it? And those people actually do a better job of engaging with the habit, because a lot of times what happens, it's ironic, but we've all been there, which is you feel so bad about the fact that you ate the French fries that now you go eat the chocolate chip cookies because you know what I mean, and it's like, well, that's not going to help you. And in fact, they've shown that one of the things that like people who have trouble with gambling, one of the things that they do to make themselves feel better about their trouble with gambling is they go out and gamble. A lot of times what we do to make ourselves feel better is we just dig ourselves in deeper. Right. And so better show that compassion and think, well, how can I soothe myself? How can I energize myself in some other way that's going to help me get back to whatever it was I was trying to get myself to do?
Well, Gretchen, I think that you have so many phrases that stick in my head, and sometimes I get them mixed up from your different books. But I really went through this book and thought, well, what was actually in this book? And one of the things that I have started to tell myself is it's okay to abandon a project. I am the type of person who loves to learn a new skill, like maybe I want to learn to knit, or maybe I want to learn to oil paint, but maybe I don't want to stick with it for 10 years. And it goes against the grain to like learn something and then say, okay, well, I know that I can do that now. I've satisfied myself. I don't need to keep it, and I don't need to keep on making myself do it.
It's so true. And it's like you get that stuff off your shelves and off your conscience, because a lot of times you feel bad. You're like, oh, I have all this beautiful yarn. I have all these beautiful oil paints. I should be doing it. Months go by, years go by, and it feels good to put things to use. And so it feels good to think, well, I'm not using it, but I'll put it out into the world. Like my daughter and I think I wrote about it in Happier Time. For some reason, we got a massive amount of origami paper. Everybody, this was like, they're like, oh, Gretchen and her daughters would like to do origami. So we got it for so many birthdays, and it's just too frustrating. It's too hard to do origami. We can't handle it. But I was like, what do you do with it? It's so pretty. You know what I mean? And I just always made me feel guilty. Like, oh, what's wrong with us? So we can't do origami. Like I can make a paper crane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then I thought, you know what? I'll take it to my daughter's school. I went to the art teacher. I said, I have all this paper. Would you like to have it? She was like thrilled to have it. And so I gave it to the school where they can have all kinds of use for it. All these children will get so much pleasure from it. They have many more uses of it than I would ever have. I did a nice thing for the school, and I did a nice thing for me, because it's like now it's all gone and I don't have to feel bad about,
sure.
my origami skills. So it feels good to get these things out into the world where they're gonna serve their purpose.
Right. And I don't have to feel guilty every time I open that closet and see that bag of yarn staring me in the face. And how come you haven't knitted in 18 months?
The needle point pillow that's half finished.
Yes.
All those things.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, and this is a small thing, but Julie and we both bought new can openers after reading where you said, buy what you need. Why are we using these can openers that barely open the can?
Isn't it funny? It's like, I know one of my things is identify the problem. And it's just so funny to me how often you just put up with something for such a long time. And then finally, when you think about it, you're like, actually, there's a pretty easy solution here.
Yeah. Yes.
It is. It's funny. And it feels so good. I mean, like for the next year, you're going to be like clicking your heels over new can opener. It's funny.
I ended up with a new whisk and a really nice pizza cutter. And every time I use it, I'm like, I bought the nicer one so that it will last. And I'm like, this is so enjoyable to use. Even though I don't use it all the time, I love using them.
So beautiful tools make work a joy. And so I do think, like, I'm an underbuyer, so I don't like to buy stuff, but I do try to get myself, like you said, like to kind of opt for the nicer item. Like, okay, there's style folders, there's manila ones, but then there's the ones that are like have the nice stripes and like the coated paper and pretty colors. And I'm like, I'll probably use these for the next 15 years. Can I spend an extra $3?
Right.
I think I can do that. And they're so much nicer. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Well, and on the flip side, your advice to spend out and use things up. I am so guilty of buying like a special shirt.
Yes.
And then I wear it like 2 times. It goes out of style. I could have worn it on a regular basis. I don't know what I was saving it for.
I do that all the time. I have to constantly force myself to use things up. It is so hard for me.
Yes.
I have a candle right here, and I'm like, I have to use this candle. They kind of go bad. You know, the oils don't work anymore. I'm like, you got to use this thing up. I know T-shirts. I know it's like it's so pristine, and then you're like, yeah, it doesn't work anymore.
We actually had a bad power outage here in Nashville about 2 weeks ago. I was oddly thrilled to use up a lot of candles. I was oddly thrilled to light them and think, oh, thank goodness I can get rid of some of these candles.
Yeah. Well, for Mother's Day, my daughter, who's home from college, was like, would you like new dish towels? And I was like, in fact, I would like new dish towels because ours are literally like ripped and have giant holes in them. And I thought, I love that because we really use them up and now they're great rags. But like the satisfaction of like truly using something up and then feeling like, okay, it's okay to get something new because they really need to be replaced. It really does feel good. I mean, one of the most poignant stories I ever heard was from a woman who said her mother died. And so she went to go clean out the house. she found some fancy china that she had never seen in her whole life. She didn't know her mother had it. And she said, in my mother's whole life, there was never an occasion that was special enough for this very fancy china. And she said now she uses it every day.
Oh, yes. I can so easily see that happening.
Yeah.
Me too, 100%.
Yeah, you totally understand. Well, another thing that you wrote was underreact to a problem. And I absolutely love your honesty. Like, even though you're this happiness guru, you don't always succeed in being happy. And you said that you have a short temper and a tendency to overreact. And that is me too. And so the month that I worked on underreacting to a problem was super helpful. And I need to remind myself of that more often.
The thing is, it really works, right? Didn't you find, like, when I take it up, everybody else takes it up. And when I keep it down, everybody's so relieved. But I feel like often there's a pause. Like, my family can feel me pausing and they're like, okay, it could go either way. Which way is she going to go? I go, you know, it could go to 11 or we could keep it around 3. It's hard, though. It's hard to remember to do it, too.
Right. It really is.
I feel like once you see how effective it is, it's a lot easier to try to make it into a practice, because I think it really does keep the household so much more calmer and more cooperative. If somebody's made a mistake, they're more eager to, like, they're sort of less defensive. And so it's more constructive, I find.
Yeah, it's easier to own up to a mistake to your mom when she doesn't just blow up.
Yes, exactly.
For sure. Well, another thing that has helped me so much, suffer for 15 minutes each day.
Yeah.
You know, I have the same problem that you had with my photo albums. And this is the only area that I've really taken to using the suffer for 15 minutes. But I am almost caught up. I'm working on 2019 now. And I feel really proud of myself starting at like 2016.
Wow. I think photographs, we love them and we have more than ever. And I think for many people, they're just like a suffocating burden. It's almost terrifying. I was doing an event and somebody started crying. She was asking a question about photographs and she just felt so overwhelmed. And I think you're right. Like, your 2016 feels unimaginable that you could get yourself up to the present, but there you did it. I mean, gold star. That is not easy. But then you're going to be so happy later that you did it. That's part of what makes it hard, is you can't pretend like you won't care.
Right.
Because we all love photographs.
Yes.
Well done. That's a huge accomplishment.
Yes.
I have a funny story about that. So you know how if you have a glass shower encasement, that if you like squeegee it every time, you know, you're done, that it should keep the glass clean. Well, I was laughing last night because I was anticipating us talking to you, Gretchen. And I was like, I don't even want to suffer for like a minute to squeegee my shower. But I do it because, and also going through my mind was, okay, happiness doesn't always make me feel happy. I do not feel happy legitimately like squeegeeing the shower. However, I know that I will be happy later when I don't have to like scrub all the grime and soap scum off of my shower glass. I just think that's so funny. You talked about that, Marie, suffering for 15 minutes. Like, sometimes it's hard to suffer for like 5 minutes. But you feel so much better when you do.
Yes. You mentioned I have a podcast, the Happier with Gretchen Rubin podcast. And one idea we've talked about a lot is the 1 minute rule, which is anything you can do in less than a minute, you go ahead and do without delay, whether it's like hanging up your coat instead of throwing it over a chair, or, you know, folding a sweater and putting it back, or taking your coffee cup back to the kitchen. And again, it's like, it's just 1 minute and you're like, well, of course I could do something for 1 minute, but then you're like, oh, but who even wants to do something for 1 minute? I don't even want to put my coat, you know. But then you find that if you do it just in these little tiny things, it ends up saving you a lot of time and hassle and like making everything much easier. And it's funny how many people have said like you're like, give me the 1 minute solution. That's what I'm looking for.
That's right. That's me. I'm the 1 minute.
Yeah. Not even 15. Take it to 1 and I can get on.
Yes.
You can do a lot in a minute, you know.
Right.
Put your keys back where they're supposed to go. It's like, oh, that can save hours.
Yes. Well, the last thing that I really wanted to let you know that I love is you're responding to bids. So I had never heard it put in that way before. Like, when someone makes an attempt to connect with us with a touch, a question, a gesture, we should answer with a comment or a laugh or acknowledge them. And, you know, a lot of times with our own family, we don't respond to bids. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's interesting. The research does show that, like with couples show more courtesy to friends and even strangers than they do to each other. So I think part of it is these people are close to us, so we feel like we can take them for granted. And then I think sometimes too, we even take out, we know it's a safe place to be grumpy or to, be short, or if you're feeling very low energy, to kind of conserve. But I think you're right. I think it creates a much more tender and affectionate and warm atmosphere when you feel like if you say something, people respond. And they, what I really try to do is put down my book. It's like if someone's talking to me, like I want to visually signal, you have my attention, I'm not distracted. Again, that's easier said than done, because sometimes it's so hard to move our attention around. Sometimes it feels very burdensome.
Yeah, I love how you acknowledge that you like to get lost in a project and your thoughts, and you don't take kindly to being interrupted, and I don't really love being interrupted either. It's not even like on the outside, I might not even be doing anything that appears super important, but it's my thought process.
Mm-hmm. I realized it's most important when packing.
Okay.
Because in packing, I'm like, going through, and if you interrupt me, I may think I put in my bathing suit, but you got me right at that moment. So now I say to my family, once I start packing, don't talk to me until I've run through the cycle, because that train of thought is precious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's probably fair to let them know, because I know this is an area where my husband and I struggle. He will say something and get no response. Yeah. And I've responded in my head.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's still waiting.
Silent response. Yeah.
So, anyways, I think we all have learned so much from your book. Well, now I want to move on to the topic of now. And Gretchen, we want to get kind of your reflection, because you wrote this book almost 10 years ago. And I'm sure it feels like a bit of a trip back in time to hear us quote your words and talk about your family at the stage that it was when you wrote it. So your last chapter at Happier at Home seems to be a reflection on your year of pursuing a happier home. And I appreciated your honesty when talking about your feelings. And I'm just going to read a quote that you wrote. On any particular day, I sometimes wished I could forget about my resolutions. I wanted to not work, not visit the Museum of the City of New York with Eliza. I didn't want to take the time to hold the door for the slow-walking woman, or even to say a polite hello to the other parents at morning drop-off. I didn't want to dig deep or respond to the spirit of a gift or suffer for 15 minutes. But my life is happier when I keep my resolutions. How do you feel about that? Do you still struggle to keep your happiness resolutions, or has it gotten easier the more the years go by?
Well, it's definitely gotten easier the more the years go by, because I do see that they make me happier. And so they're sort of self-affirming. I feel like I understand myself much better now. I understand kind of what to watch out for and how to take advantage of my strengths. One of the things that was really funny after I wrote the Happiness Project and I wrote Happier at Home, people kept saying to me, well, how did you keep those resolutions? And I would say, well, I decided that I would try things that I thought would make me happier. And then if they did make me happier, then I would just really keep them. And they would look very puzzled and they would say, but how did you keep your resolutions? And I'm like, what's going on? Because people, they're not responding the way I was. And that's what led me to my 4 tendencies framework, which is a whole, personality framework that I came up with that divides people into upholders, questioners, obligers, and rebels. And that taught me a lot about myself and why I make resolutions the way I do. And anybody who wants to know what their tendency is, there's a free, very quick quiz at quiz.gretchenrubin.com. And it will give you a report on you and how to use that. That really helped me understand kind of my nature about keeping resolutions. Why it was that I did find them very energizing and freeing. Some people didn't like the idea of keeping so many resolutions. They felt like it made them feel trapped or chained. But for me, I was like, oh, the more the better. This is great.
Yeah.
So I keep on making them.
Right. Well, and your 4 tendencies, I've worn my family and friends out talking about the 4 tendencies.
Oh, good.
Having people take the quiz.
Now, what's your tendency?
A questioner.
Okay. All right. Good.
So
like my
I'm
husband.
only going to follow resolutions or rules that I can see a good reason for.
Yeah.
And it has also been super freeing for me because my daughter, who I would have a lot of conflict with, she's a rebel. And it helped me so much to just take a step back and say, you know what? My tendency is to give her reason after reason after reason why she should do this thing. Yeah. Really, I need to just say what'll happen if you don't do it and walk away.
Yes, you got it. You're a master. You are a master of the tendencies. Yeah, I think the rebel tendency is like, it's the most different from the other three. I think it's hard for people who aren't rebels to kind of wrap their mind about how most effectively to work with rebels. So I'm glad to hear that it was helpful for you, because I think sometimes parents of rebel children, if they're not rebels themselves, they can not really understand what's going on, I think. So that's great. Do the other two of you know your tendencies? What are your tendencies?
I think I'm an obliger. That's one of them, right?
Yes,
it is. That is the biggest. That is the biggest one. So it's
That's me too.
Okay,
I'm an obliger as well. Right.
Yeah.
I remember your sister Elizabeth talking, and she's an obliger, and she literally was saying the words that I was thinking, like, I don't want to be an obliger. I'd really like to be something else, but
there's so much strength and power in the obliger tendency. Many of the greatest people, most successful people in the world are obligers. The secret for obligers is, if you want to meet an inner expectation, you have to have outer accountability. If you want to read a book, join a book group. If you want to exercise, take a class, or work out with a friend, or take your dog for a run, and he'll tear up the furniture if you don't. Well, once you know that, then you're kind of unstoppable. But I think sometimes obligers get confused and frustrated because they're like, well, I see that I can meet promises to other people. Why can't I keep my promise to myself? And that's just a bad feeling. But then once you realize, oh, well, look, this is a huge tendency. I'm not alone in it. So I'll sign up for a class. I'm fine. Or I'll teach a class. A lot of obligers will teach something as a way to get to do it.
Well, and it goes back to be yourself. Like, quit wishing you weren't that. And just accept it so you can make the best of it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Gretchen, that kind of leads into, you talk a lot about what you like to call splendid truths.
Yes.
And one of them in this chapter is that you can build a happy life only on the foundation of your own nature. Just because something is fun for someone else doesn't make it fun for me. I can choose what I do, but I can't choose what I like to do. And again, I've realized that to be happy, I must be Gretchen. So can you explain to listeners what you mean by this?
Well, so feel free to substitute your own name. It's this idea that I really have to think about, well, what is true for me? What's important to me? What are my values? It's funny with the Happiness Project, there are things that I thought a lot about that other people wouldn't think about. And then there are things that I didn't think much about. Like, I think for many people in a happy life, sort of like adventure and travel might be a big part of it. It's like really something that they want to incorporate in their life that has a lot of meaning for them and a lot of enjoyment. Music is something that's not very important to me. It's not, but I know many people where they have, like, that's been a major element of their happiness project, whether it's things like getting back into playing or getting back into going to live performances or even just listening to new music and, or making time for music. That's just not that important to me. So that's not part of what I would do, but I have to let go of the fantasy that should be part of who I am. You'd think, well, it's so easy to know yourself. You just hang out with yourself all day long. And yet it can be very, very hard to know ourselves. A lot of adults have a lot of trouble knowing what they want to do for fun, right? We're all doing fun for the whole family, but then you're like, well, what's actually fun for me? A great question is, what did you do for fun when you were 10 years old? And what I found is that what people did for fun when they were 10 years old is probably something that they would enjoy now, kind of the adult version. And if you like doing arts and crafts,
so true.
You're probably learning how to do oil painting, or that would be fun for you if you're not. Or if you like to walk in the woods with your dog, you probably would really like to walk through the woods with your dog now. Even things like morning people, night people. I think sometimes people are just like, I should be a morning person. I will be a morning person. And you're like, yeah, you know what? You're a night person.
Yeah.
So like genetically determined and a function of age. Like it's not something that you choose. It's not something that's right with you or wrong with you. It's just the way some people are made. So deal with it. But I think some people they don't even know that about themselves. They don't even know something about the rhythms of their own energy. That's a hugely valuable thing to know about yourself.
Yes. Yeah. We've actually talked about that because our podcast is focused a lot on midlife women. And a lot of women get to midlife and they've taken care of kids and their families and kind of forgotten what they enjoyed. And what they like in the process. And that's such great advice to think about, well, what did you like to do when you were a kid?
Well, I had a terrifying to me experience where I was at a cocktail party and there was a mom in my daughter's class, somebody I'd always really liked. So I was really excited to talk to her. And she was telling me about how her family was going on this ski trip for the holidays. And she was like, oh, and skiing's so wonderful. It's beautiful. It's exercise. It's something the whole family can do. It's like so healthy. And I was like, oh, yeah, it sounds great. But the fact is one of my favorite things about my husband is a bum knee because then we never get to go skiing. I hate being cold. I'm super unathletic. I don't like equipment. Like it's like nothing about. I'm like it sounds great, but it's not for me. It's just like oh no, you would really love it, and you could go on an easy thing and a this and a that and a this and a that. And I was like, yeah, it's just not for me. What can I tell you? And she walks off, and 20 minutes later, she walks back to me, and she has this stricken look on her face, and she said, "You know what I realized? I don't like skiing."
Oh.
And she'd so convinced herself because it's one thing to go and think, you know what, it's not my favorite idea for a vacation, but I'm going to do it because everybody else enjoys it. But she was so out of touch with herself.
Right.
She didn't even acknowledge to herself that she didn't enjoy it. And in the end, you can't have a happy life if you're just doing whatever everybody else is doing, what everybody else thinks is fun. You have to have at least sometimes when you're doing what's fun for you. And so to me, I was like, that is a really important cautionary tale about being disengaged with whatever's really going on, you know?
Yeah.
Well, and each of us here have adult daughters. The things that we do and the way that we live right now is teaching them something about being a woman, about being a wife, about being a mother, and about finding your place in the world. And I don't know if this was a test or not, but last night, my 20-year-old daughter and I were sitting on the couch. Out of the blue, she said, "Mom, what are your hobbies?" And I was like, nobody's asked me this question in a long time. But, I said, I'm going to sound like a 10-year-old girl. That was my response. I said, I love hanging out with my friends. And, and I started going and I hadn't thought about these things, but I was able to verbalize. And then once I got started, I had a hard time stopping. And then we were watching a movie and I kept spouting things out. I'm like, oh, and I love to decorate the house. Oh, and I really love fashion. Oh, and it just kept going, but she just was so happy watching me list my hobbies. And I think it taught her something that a middle-aged woman could have hobbies. And so I'm anxious and excited to talk to her again about kind of where that came from. She's discovering herself. She's making her place in the world. She's in college right now and she's got so many dreams. And it just really was cool that she said, "What are your hobbies?"
Yeah. It doesn't surprise me that much, but it surprises a lot of people how many teenage readers I have.
Yeah.
Because it's not written for teenagers. People are always saying to me, you should write something for teenagers. I'm like, well, teenagers seem to read it just as it is. They get it. Because it is an age of self-reflection. And I think the young 20s, same thing, where people are they are saying, well, what do I want from life? What kind of person am I? How do I think about myself in distinction from other people? And so I think it is a very inward looking time in a very positive way. So I think that's great because she's probably starting to think well, what would it look like to be an adult? What is my mother's experience? My daughters say that I didn't even know that I said this, but one of them pointed out that I always say that's why it's great to be grown up. Because when something will happen, they're like, that's why it's great to be grown up. And they said, it's nice. You paint a nice picture of being an adult. Some adults are like, oh, just wait. And you're like, oh, just wait. It's going to be great. You'll be able to do whatever you want. I'm like, well, I'm glad to hear that I'm painting a positive portrait.
I love it.
Something that's inevitable. So, yeah.
Right.
Well, Gretchen, in the last chapter of your book, Happiness and Now, you talk about experiencing a feeling of jumping from prologue to epilogue without ever feeling you're at the center of time. What did you mean when you said that?
This is something that's haunted me for a long time. And actually my next book, which is about the body and the senses, is kind of grappling with this idea of not being at the center of time. I always feel like it's too early, it's too early, it's too early, it's too late, it's too late, it's too late, or things are just they haven't really started and then they're already over. And so what I'm doing in my next book is really trying to dial into my body and my senses as a way to try to really expand that sensation of now, or to really be more present in now, because this is something that is just clearly an aspect of my nature because I've been grappling with it for so long. And it's also when you look back, a time has an atmosphere. It's like fashion. At the time that a fashion is happening, you're like, well, this is just how people dress. It doesn't feel like 60s fashion or something like that. Or when everybody had avocado and Harvest Gold kitchens, they weren't like, oh my God, my kitchen is so 70s. They're like, what else would a person want? It's timeless. And so I want to try to understand that, experience that atmosphere more and really try to open my mind to it and not just rush through things. I feel like sometimes I'm so just executing on my to-do list instead of really thinking, oh, what is it like? What is it like to have a 15-year-old? What is that like?
Mm-hmm.
What is summer in New York like?
I know one of the things you have is your one sentence journal, but I think anytime we can write something, our thoughts at a time, and go back and look, it does bring all those feelings of like what it was like to have my 15-year-old. Even reading 4 or 5 sentences about how you felt on a particular day about your 15-year-old can flood your memories.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And I think photo albums can do that as well. If you write captions, because then you're like, oh, I remember when we were going to somebody's birthday party every week, or I remember when my daughter wore that mermaid costume all the time. Sometimes a picture can serve as a journal too. I think there's a lot of ways to keep journals that are really, really fun and help prod memories.
Right, right.
You write that your happiness project was your effort to stop the days from flowing away, unheeded and unappreciated. As you look back on the time between when you wrote the book and now, do you think the lessons you learned and talked about helped you experience the now in these past 8 or 9 years in a way that you otherwise wouldn't have?
Absolutely, they have. But like I said, I still feel like there's a lot of room for improvement, which is why I'm really going to dial into this through the body. I was really thinking about habits and human nature and sort of like how we do things, how we get ourselves to do things or why we don't get ourselves to do things. And now I'm really turning back into that experience of the present. I think I've made some progress, but I think I have a lot more progress to go, which is why I'm excited about the book I'm working on now.
Yes. And we'll be excited to read it.
Yes, I will be excited to have written it.
Yeah.
A long way to go.
Well, near the end of your last chapter, you say, I'm living my real life. This is it. Now is now. And if I wait to be happier, to have fun, to do the things I know I ought to do, I might never get the chance. And Mindy and Julie, how do you see this book impacting you as you move forward? What do you want to remember the most?
Well, I think I've said this a lot, but just to remember to be Julie, and which for me probably includes more of letting go of the things that I wish I were. And I think that gets easier as you get older. That's just something that I wish I could have told my younger self. And I just want to be more intentional and take notice of the here and now, not always looking for something to change in order to be happy.
In an effort to just have a more thriving, life-full household. As my kids continue to grow and change, I'm literally moving out my second child out of our home this weekend. And so I've got 2 moving out and 2 at home, and life keeps changing. And so as much as I want to hold on to those things, I think looking at it a little differently and embracing the changes, sitting with even my negative thoughts for a moment. I've started journaling things that I'm thankful for and grateful for with each child in an effort to remember, but also to try to make sure that I'm entering into this season right now, that I'm not missing it, because it's like grasping on to smoke. You're never going to be able to hold things where they are right now. And so journaling for me is like suffering for 5 minutes. I do not like to sit still and write things down, but over the past couple of months I have, and it's given me such a joy. I never knew that I would have that before. So just slowing down, being intentional, realizing what is actually in front of me, not wishing it were another way, and embracing the differences even in my children and their creative interests, and my husband and his creative interests, because he's now decided he wants to enter into the stock market. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to champion that too. Just embracing change, I guess, because life keeps changing.
That is for sure.
What I want to hold on to about your book and what I love about it, Gretchen, is that this is a self-help book, but you don't turn the last page and feel guilty like you have all these changes to make. I love that you say to be ourselves, be Marie. And I think, comparison is the thief of joy. And it's easy to think that you need to add in things that make other people happy. But that doesn't work very well. And I've tried to give myself the grace to say, hey, other people might like this or that or want to do this or that, but I don't have to feel guilty. And I just really appreciate your honesty about yourself. You obviously have learned so much about yourself through the pursuit of learning about happiness.
Yes, I have. For better or for worse, I feel like I do, but I still have a long way to go. I think it's the great goal of our whole lives.
Well, Gretchen, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such an honor to get to talk to you. Will you let our listeners know where they can find you?
Yes, I so enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for having me. If you want to learn more, you can go to GretchenRubin.com, which is RUBIN. And that's like a clearinghouse. You can look up information for my books. I have all kinds of free resources. You can check out episodes of my podcast, which is called Happier with Gretchen Rubin, or you can get that wherever you're listening to your podcast. I'm all over social media, and my handle is Gretchen Rubin. And I love hearing insights and questions and observations from people about happiness. So hit me up. I love to connect. And I have a free weekly newsletter about like 5 things that are making me happy. And I have all kinds of resources in that. So if you go to GretchenRubin.com/newsletter, you can sign up for that. Oh, and if you want to take the quiz, you can go to quiz.GretchenRubin.com and find out if you're an upholder like me, a questioner. We have 1 questioner, 2 obligers, and a rebel daughter.
Yes.
Yeah. You can find out your tendency.
Yes. Diving into that is just addictive. I love it so much.
It is.
It is fun.
Listeners, if you enjoyed reading Happier at Home with us, I know you're going to love Gretchen's other books. Also, if you love podcasts, her podcast, her weekly podcast with her sister is just a joy. I listen to it on my workout every Wednesday morning. It's like the way I get through my Wednesday morning workout.
Oh, great. I'm so happy to hear that.
Yes. And if you missed any of our other Happier episodes from the months that we've done these, I'll link them in our show notes at midlifematterspodcast.com. Thank you, Gretchen, for coming on. And thank you, Julie and Mindy, for this great conversation. I truly enjoyed it.
Oh, I did too.
Thanks
Thank you,
much.
Gretchen.
So fun to talk to you.
Thanks,
All
Gretchen.
right. We'll talk to you guys next
All right.
week. We're so happy you joined us today. If you'd like to get the show notes for today's episode, please email your name and address to midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com and write show notes in the subject line. Also, please tell a friend about the show and help them hit the free subscribe button on their favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast. That's where we post pictures and stories about all the things we talk about in each episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.